folks, welcome to the Prepared Homestead. This is Travis. Thank you all for stopping by to watch. Here lately we've been talking a lot about food shortages and potential food shortages with everything that's been happening over in Europe. I mean, I don't need to recap it. You all are aware of it, of how just between Russia and Ukraine alone, they're making up about 30% of the wheat exports. And then when you add in other pretty high food producing nations like Hungary and Moldova, Argentina, Turkey, that are either cutting off their exports and just keeping it all at home for themselves, or they're, being a little bit more restrictive with their exports. It's no surprise and no shock that there could be global shortages, and this has been in the news quite a bit in the last several days. One of the things here in the United States, a lot of people keep saying is, well, but we produce a lot of food, and we do. America has just about more just land that's producing crops than anywhere else. I mean, we produce a lot. I believe there's somewhere around 800 million acres in the United States between what's used for cattle and what's used for cropland, maybe just a little bit more than that. And that's quite a bit. I mean, I think Russia's land is somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 million acres. And so we produce a lot. And if America was, completely self-sufficient, if we had a government that said, hey, with all this is going on, we're going to focus on making sure we have enough first before we export anything else, then I wouldn't be worried so much. I mean, it would be awful for other people in other countries, and of course I would feel for them. But as far as myself, my family, and my friends and fellow Americans, I would think, well, at least we're going to be fine. But that's not the case. We don't live in a country that does that, and we most certainly don't have a government and leadership in our government that's willing to do that. And I absolutely have no doubt, as this thing continues to worsen and other countries start saying, hey, our people are going to starve. I mean, we just don't have enough food, and we really need food. America's going to do what America has done in the past, and we're going to start shipping out our own food, and potentially putting our own selves at risk. And it's because we have such a globalist market. I mean, that's just how it is. And so, even though a lot of these things that are happening are affecting food supplies that may not directly come to us, we need to be cautious of that. Now, we've been talking a lot about wheat because wheat has been the number one thing in the news, but most certainly these countries that were, that's cutting off their supplies, they produce other things. Russia produces a lot of other things. They produce tons and tons of potatoes. Ukraine is the world's largest producer of sunflower seeds and sunflower seed oil, and also one of the top producers of corn. So all those things are going to affect us. But let's just, for this video, and this is a long intro, I know everyone hates it when I do that. Let's talk about the United States and the West, also include South America, because we do get a lot of our food from South America. It's just how it is. We get a lot from South America. I found this article, and this was, I believe, back in December, the last part of December. And of course, this is before all this stuff happened over in Europe with Russia and Ukraine. And it's talking about America's wheat harvest. And it's saying that while this past year, and it's talking about the winter wheat harvest, because at the time of this article, that's what was in the ground, was the winter wheat, of how it's an improvement over last year. There's more acreage that was planted than the previous year, but overall it's still in decline. We're producing about 20 million less acreage of wheat than we once did, a decade or so ago. And a lot of this is stuff that we have talked about on this channel, and I'm sure many of you have read and discussed with other people, of how there's this encouragement basically to not plant, to let land just go. There's incentives, government incentives to not plant, and then there's just the fact that farming in America has become so big and corporatized that the small farmer, it's difficult. It's difficult for the small family farmer to do it on their own. It's becoming more and more difficult, and so we're seeing less and less land farmed here in the United States, and that's going to be a problem as this all transpires around the world. The fact that America is producing less than what they're capable of, it's going to hurt us. But also, America and South America, both, pretty much the Western Hemisphere, has been dealing with some serious drought conditions over the last few years. And look at these. I'm going to show you some maps here. And these are as of basically the first of this year. And it's showing, this is the winter wheat harvest. And winter wheat seems to be doing a little bit better. You can see where the areas, the dark and the light green are the areas that the winter wheat is grown. And then that red kind of hash area, that's the areas of severe drought. And so it's doing a little bit better, but still, certainly a lot of areas are in drought conditions, which doesn't mean that there won't be any harvest, but it'll mean that the harvest is just not of high quality. I was reading last year, and I'm sure it'll be the same this year, because I'll show you here in a little bit, that they're expecting the droughts to be even worse this year in a lot of these areas. That they were getting the harvest, and for a lot of you farmers, you know this, but there's some on this channel that aren't. So they're out there and they're harvesting the wheat, and the wheat's growing, and they're getting, the wheat berries and everything from it, but the wheat itself is small. And in the same way with other crops, because there's not enough water. So overall, that acreage is not producing as much land as it once did, because obviously there's not enough water. Here's another map here, and this is showing your spring wheat, and that's in worse condition, because where that is grown in the country is in much more of a higher area of drought, and then also the durum wheat. These these drought conditions are just worsening. They're talking about the possibility of this year the drought will be even worse and will expand in areas. Here's a current map of where the drought conditions are right now. They were hoping that over the winter that there would be, increased snow in these areas, and it just didn't work out as planned. And so all the predictions right now is that this whole area that you're seeing in this map of drought conditions is going to get worse, and it's expanding. And so that is going to affect our own production of food. South America's dealing with the same problem. Soybean, they're saying like 50% of soybean in South America is in severe drought conditions, and they just may not produce much at all in those areas because of the severe drought that's going on. So the point of all this, and this is, I'm not trying to be all doomsday on you, is that like we do with a lot of things, we as Americans, okay, not necessarily specifically you and I, but as Americans, we see a story, we see a problem, and we focus on just that problem, and we fail to realize that there's a lot of other things that are going on that fit with that. And so, for instance, as an example, we hear about, they're shutting down wheat, and there's all this wheat going up because of Russia, Ukraine, and it's going to cause problems with that. Well, what about the fertilizer shortages? What about the glyphosate shortage? The chemicals that are used in crop production. That's going to exacerbate the whole situation. So if the food supply is lessened just because of the war in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia, then how much worse is it going to get because of the shortages of those chemicals? Now you take that situation, you add to it that here in the United States and in South America, we're dealing with some serious drought conditions. And while we're still producing a lot of food, and we're to the point that we're able to export it, the fact is that we're not producing enough. That article, the first one that I showed you, in the article, the guy that's writing it, he's talking about how Americans aren't the big player that they think they are when it comes to wheat. I mean, we produce a lot, but we're not the really big players in the markets when it comes to wheat, and that we are not producing. They're expecting this reduction of crops to continue. And he's, and like I said, this is like a 3-month-old article, and he's saying in the article that farmers need to produce more, that we're getting to the point that it could be critical, that if something happened globally, that it could greatly affect it, and we can't just solely depend on the fact that, oh, well, we produce a lot. Well, we're not producing as much as we once did. We're not putting out the acres. There's an article here that farmers this year is expected to not make as much money. I think the number is somewhere between 7 and 8% reduction in profits for farming. Well, my goodness, 7 and 8% reduction of profits is significant for farming, because so many farms make very little profit to begin with. I mean, many of you watching are farmers, or you grew up in farming families where you put out big crop productions, and that your margin of profit is pretty narrow. And so if you cut 7-8% out of your profit, that's significant. That's enough to completely close out some farms. I mean, there's going to be some farmers that just can't do it. That they can't continue farming if they're going to lose that much money. And then on top of all that, there's a problem, continually a problem with parts for equipment. I talked about this over my Patreon yesterday, of how the trucking industry, how the mining industry are really struggling to maintain just their equipment, because they can't get the parts that they need, because we're still dealing with a supply chain problem. We're dealing a shortage of parts. We're dealing with a very slow delivery of those parts, because so many ships are tied up out in the docks, and that trucks aren't able to move in the way that they once did, and it's creating just an overall problem. And so something that I have said many times on this channel, that I hope that a lot of you see, is that everything that's happening, it's not just one singular event or one thing that's happened. There's a real big picture going on. And when we talk about, Russia, Ukraine, and wheat shortages there, that's one piece in the greater puzzle. And for us, especially here in the United States, but really the whole world, when it comes to food shortages, and myself and many other channels are kind of, ringing the warning bells of people, that people need to get ready, because there is a very real chance that we could start seeing, serious famine level food shortages when you start to, add in the war, the fertilizer shortages, you add in drought conditions, you add in the fact that farmers are producing less and less, they can't make enough money, so many farms are closing down. When you add in that they can't get the parts and the equipment that they need to maintain, their equipment, there is a very big problem looming here, and it literally is the elephant in the room that so many people are just ignoring. And it's becoming such a problem that I just don't know if there's a way for it to just be fixed before it all collapses. Maybe there is. I'm not that kind of an expert. But when I sit back and I see that, wow, there's a problem over here with this and a problem over here with this, and they may seem completely unrelated, but they're very, very interconnected. And all of these things happening at the same time, it is very much a perfect storm. But when you look at all this and you realize that the United States condition is not really that good either. We're not in a great condition when it comes to our food. I mean, you read some reports and they're like, oh yeah, we planted more corn this year than last year. Well, but if you look at how much corn we planted versus 10 years ago, it's significantly less. And so, it makes it sound like it's not too bad. It's kind of like when they give you the inflation numbers. Oh, well, inflation's only 7.5% higher. Well, it's only 7.5% higher over last year. How much higher is it over 2 or 3 years ago? quite a bit higher. So don't just look at the numbers that they put out and think, well, it's not too bad. Do a little bit digging. And when you do that, you realize that while we do produce a lot of food, we're not in the best conditions as we should be, especially when you consider all the things happening and the fact that you know as well as I do that we're not going to be some of these countries and enact protectionist type policies where we keep our food home to make sure that we have enough. We're going to be, as soon as we start hearing of these countries that are going through famine and serious problems with food, America's going to be the first one to start shipping out our food and say, well, Americans just can do less, kind of like what we heard, we're going to put all these sanctions and Americans are going to have to pay for it through $5, $6, $7, $8, $9 gasoline. But that's our sacrifice. That's America. Why am I having to sacrifice? Why am I having to sacrifice for things happening in another country that really shouldn't affect me? And then we'll hear the same thing. Well, Americans are just going to have to sacrifice and deal with less food and pay $10 a loaf for bread because we got to send stuff over to the Middle East or to India or to Africa because they don't have enough. And I believe in the Bible, and I believe in the teachings of Jesus, but I also believe that we need to take care of our own first. We need to take care of our own family first before we start, helping everyone else around the world. So, folks, get ready, get your house in order. Prepare yourselves mentally, physically, and spiritually, because as this all transpires, I think things are going to start to get pretty serious when it comes to food. And this is just only food. There's other things going on too. All right, folks, thank you for watching. I'll catch you in the next video.